Hey again, everybody. Just wanted to take a minute and talk about putting the pieces of your paper together. Um, Before we get specific into that, let me just jump back in to our course homepage here. Maybe. There we go. And look, as you look at what's coming up. So today we're here on the 30s. Is this first? Yeah, sorry. Wow. Um, I said I will post a video that will talk about the results discussion and conclusion section and what subtopics need to be included. That one is already up. So there's that. There's a link right there. Then by Tuesday of next week, I will post a video that will talk about pulling this stuff together. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And I say that to remind you that a week from today, you've got all of this due. So you've got 1 week to finish up everything. Um, the idea there is that it will be, this last section, and then you're going to pull it all together by the very end of this semester. So I push that on out um, to 416. You've got a work day, of course, built in. Of course, they're all work days at this point. And I'll send you feedback on this section by Thursday. So let's get back to this idea of pulling things together. And this will be pretty short. What I have done is pulled up both the articles that you have access to in the Blackboard site, right? So the quantitative example and the qualitative example. And the qualitative, example here, let's see if I can make this just a little, there we go. It's using more of what's called a hard transition. So it relies heavily on the headers to move from one section to the other. Now, that may be because, I suspect it's because of time, or I guess space in this case. So they probably had a very tight page limit, a lot to say, and so they didn't want to, take up space with smooth transitions. And I understand that, really. I mean, it's understandable to do it. But you see, even here, from the lit review section with the research questions to the method section, there's not anything between this heading and then this subheading. For your paper, you can choose to do yours that way if you would like. What I recommend, though, is if you have the space. Now, again, there is a page limit here. Go back and look at the syllabus. But if you have the space to do it, this isn't me telling you to drag your paper out or to fluff it up. But in the event you need a little more, here's what I would recommend. Here is the other paper. I know, yeah, I wrote it. So it's still just, I really always do basically the same thing. So there's my methodology section, which means, oops, here's my research questions, right? So I'm at the end of the lit review here. And then I switch to methodology. And you'll see that I've got this paragraph here. What this does is preview what's coming up in this section. I think it's because I'm a speech teacher by trade. And, in a speech, you're going to always use internal previews and reviews. And I think that's just where this comes from for me. But I sort of give you the heads up of what we're going to do. First, I'm going to talk about this. Second, I'm going to talk about that one. You can kind of see how I break that up. And then what's going to be used, and each step is detailed below. And so I had Confederate selection. Yep, there's that one. Consultant training, participants. All right, so everything's listed. Even when you get down to the results section, this is the preview of what's going to happen in the results section. And then I start in with research questions. This one's kind of chunky because of the layout here, but then there's the research question 1, research question 2, 3, 4's at the bottom. Here's the discussion section, the next big chunk. Here's the preview paragraph. And then I get into those individual sections. And of course, there's no conclusion labeled, but I do, talk about future research and limitations, additional findings, workshop group, whatever I thought was needed to be expanded upon, and that's what you will do as well. Now, the idea for your paper, again, as I mentioned, see where you are. Don't worry about pulling it together as you write the pieces. That shouldn't be on your mind. See it as a series of smaller writing assignments. One that makes it mentally easier to accomplish because it's not this big project. It's small pieces. And then at the end, this time next week, or ideally this weekend, you'll be able to look at those and pull them together, and you'll see that you have something that will fit together fairly easily. And if you don't, that's where you want to go back and edit. But again, as I mentioned, if you want to do more of the hard transition style here, where you just rely on those headings, that's fine. In a speech, as I mentioned before, I'm a speech person. In a speech, you can't do this. You can't come up and say things like, my first research question was this, my second research question was that. Method, participants and procedures, crisis team members, like, it wouldn't work. And so I write largely the way I talk, though cleaned up a little probably. So it's up to you on your style. Usually, the interesting thing here is that usually the more quantitative a study is, the more impersonal it seems. It's got the hard breaks. And the more quantitative or qualitative it is, usually the nice flowing transitions that link things together. In this case, it's just the opposite. So again, you choose what works for you. Let your space usage dictate which one you use. If you don't have space, you find yourself over the limit and you need to reduce, take those out. Just use the really hard transitions with headings. If you see that you still have space that you can work with, go back and add in those transitions. And also, as you edit, let me just say, this is important. When you edit, here's my recommendation for you. Read aloud. Read aloud to yourself, but read aloud. You're going to find things that you otherwise wouldn't find. When we as humans read things silently that we have written, and let's say there's just a complete word missing. So let's say like this word, this. In part because this played a role in decreasing social media traffic. If that was gone and we wrote this, we would read it just fine. In part because played a role, and we're going to know what this was talking about before. We don't, that referent to this. So if you read it aloud, though, it'll hit your ear and your brain will pause. But if you just do it internally, sometimes we skip those. So do go back and edit. If you have any fluff that has already been put in the paper, not that you would, but some folks might, get it out. Get it out. You don't want any fluff in this paper. That's why I say those transitions aren't fluff. They're useful. They have a job, and they accomplish something for you and your reader. But if you have any fluff, get that out. I'll be, of course, looking for fluff, and we don't want it. Just stick to what we need to know. Now, the discussion section, that one's a little more, freewheeling. And if you think something deserves to be talked about in a little more detail, then you go for that. You're the researcher. And so you're making that call. But you know what fluff is. I do too. So stay away from that. If you need that space to fill up, use clear transitions between everything. All right, so edit aloud. Do it multiple times. My recommendation, again, is if you are reading it on a screen, do it aloud. If you're reading it on paper, do it aloud. Make edits as you go, whether it's on the screen or on paper. You might just even put a little symbol to go back and look at it. That way you kind of keep your mojo working there. You keep flowing down through the document. And again, remember that everything until that final paper is a draft. You get graded on the sections, but I'll send you back my feedback that you can incorporate, clean up the papers, the sections, and pull it all together. So that's really all I wanted to tell you about that. I, again, prefer you focus on each part for now. We'll pull it together later. We'll think about how one piece relates to the next and what their jobs are. So, we've got the review of literature that ends in research questions. The method tells us how we're going to answer those questions. The results tell us the answers to those questions. The discussion tells us what those answers to those questions means. And then, of course, the conclusion at the end. So if you have questions about this, please let me know. Otherwise, go back and look at some different articles. Read not only the ones that we have here, but there are others, shorter ones, other authors on the database. Just go to our library's website here, and you can find tons, and see how they do it. And get that model, find one that you like, and make it work. All right, again, if you have questions, let me know.